They say time heals all wounds, but they never mention that time also sharpens the blade of karma. Standing by my mother's casket, I expected tears, but instead, I witnessed a bloodless execution. My sister Tiffany, the woman who took everything from me 6 years ago, didn't just freeze when she saw my husband. She looked like she had seen the Grim Reaper himself, and in a way, she had. My name is Shirley Pennington. I am 32 years old, and for most of my life, I existed as a ghost in my own home. I am a landscape architect by trade, a profession that suits me because I understand the value of things that are grounded, silent, and enduring. I work with soil, stone, and root systems, things that do not scream for attention, but hold the earth together when the storm comes. This preference for the unseen and the sturdy was not a choice I made freely. It was a survival mechanism forged in the fires of a suburban Chicago household that valued nothing but the shine of the surface. To understand why I ended up standing over my mother's casket with a heart made of granite, you have to understand the architecture of my childhood. Our house in the suburbs was a sprawling, colonial-style structure that smelled perpetually of lemon polish and my mother's expensive gardenia perfume. It was a smell that masked everything: the damp scent of the basement where I spent my evenings, the stale odor of unpaid bills hidden in my father's desk, and the metallic tang of resentment that I swallowed with every family dinner. In the Pennington household, there were two distinct classes of citizens. There was Tiffany, and then there was everyone else. Tiffany was 3 years younger than me. The miracle baby, the golden idol around which our family's entire orbit spun. She was born with blue eyes that sparkled like cut sapphires and a laugh that could charm a wallet out of a miser's pocket. I, on the other hand, was the mistake. I was the practice run, the rough draft that my parents deemed functional but aesthetically displeasing. I had brown eyes, hair that refused to curl, and a personality that was too serious, too quiet, and far too observant for their liking. The dynamic was established before I could even tie my shoes. If you walked into our living room, the mantle over the fireplace told the entire story of our family mythology. It was crowded with Tiffany's accolades. There were participation trophies for ballet recitals she had barely practiced for, sashes from local beauty pageants where she had won Miss Congeniality, and framed photographs of her smiling with politicians and local celebrities. It was a shrine to mediocrity wrapped in glitter. My achievements, however, were treated like contraband. I remember the day I came home with a certificate for winning the statewide math Olympiad. It was the result of months of studying, nights spent hunched over textbooks while Tiffany watched reality television at full volume in the next room. I brought the certificate to my mother, my chest swelling with a rare, fragile hope. She was in the kitchen, arranging flowers for a dinner party. She glanced at the paper, wiped her hands on a towel, and smiled that tight, dismissive smile she reserved exclusively for me. "That is nice, Shirley," she said, her voice devoid of any real warmth. "Put it in the drawer with the utility bills so it does not get lost. We need the fridge door clear for Tiffany's modeling headshots. The agent said visibility is key." So, I did. I opened the junk drawer, pushed aside a tangle of rubber bands and dead batteries, and buried my pride beneath a stack of unpaid electric bills. That was the lesson I learned at 10 years old. My substance would always be secondary to her style. I became the glass child, transparent, easily looked through, and only noticed when I cracked. The emotional neglect was a slow poison, but the financial disparity was a blunt instrument. By the time I was 18 and ready for college, the reality of my position became impossible to ignore. I had been accepted into a prestigious architecture program, a dream I had nurtured in secret. I sat my parents down at the dining table, a spreadsheet of tuition costs and potential scholarships laid out before me. My father sighed, rubbing his temples as if my ambition was a headache he could not shake. "Shirley, be realistic," he said, avoiding my eyes. "We simply do not have the liquidity right now. The market is down." But you just bought Tiffany a brand new convertible for her 16th birthday, I pointed out, my voice trembling. And you paid for that modeling camp in Los Angeles. That camp alone cost $5,000 for 2 weeks. My mother slammed her hand on the table. That is an investment. Shirley, Tiffany has a future in the industry. She needs those connections. Your sister represents the best of this family. You are strong, you are capable. You can figure this out on your own. You have always been the independent one. Independent was their code word for abandoned. It was a convenient label that absolved them of any responsibility. Because I did not cry. Because I did not throw tantrums. They assumed I did not need care. They leveraged the equity in our home to fund Tiffany's pageant fees, her wardrobe, and her portfolio shoots, while I was left to navigate the crushing weight of student loans alone. And so, I hardened. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. By day, I attended lectures on structural integrity and urban planning. By night, I waited tables at a 24-hour diner where the tips were meager and the customers were rude. On weekends, I shelved books at the university library, breathing in the scent of old paper and dust, finding more comfort in the silence of the stacks than I ever found in my own home. I slept 4 hours a night for 4 years. I ate instant noodles and wore clothes from thrift stores. I built a shell around myself, layer by layer, until I was impervious to their indifference. But the worst part was not the work. It was a theft. Tiffany did not just take our parents' money. She took pieces of me. She would raid my closet, stretching out the few nice sweaters I had saved up to buy, returning them stained with wine or smelling of cigarette smoke. If I complained, I was selfish. She just wanted to look nice for her date. "Shirley," my mother would say, stitching a button back onto a ruined cardigan, "why are you so stingy? You are her big sister. You should want her to shine." It escalated beyond clothes. In my senior year, I designed a landscape concept for a community garden as part of my final thesis. I left the sketches on the dining room table one weekend when I visited home to do laundry. 2 days later, I saw Tiffany posting a photo of my sketches on her Instagram, captioning it, "Late night creative burst. So proud of my vision for a greener world. #artistic soul." When I confronted her, she laughed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Oh, relax. Shirley, I just needed some content. It is not like I am actually going to build it. Nobody cares about the technical stuff anyway. They just like the aesthetic. You should be thanked. I got you 200 likes." I realized then that to them, I was not a person. I was a resource. I was a battery they could drain to power the neon sign that was Tiffany. The day I graduated, they did not come to the ceremony. Tiffany had a callback for a shampoo commercial, which she did not book, and they needed to be there for moral support. I walked across the stage alone, accepted my diploma, and felt a severing in my chest. It was the final crack in the glass. I landed a junior architect role at a firm called Urban Nexus straight out of college. It was a grueling job with long hours, but for the first time, I was valued for my precision, not my appearance. I moved out of the house the following week. I found a tiny studio apartment in a rundown part of the city, right next to the elevated train tracks. The walls were thin. The radiator clanked like a dying engine, and the view was a brick wall. But when I locked the door that first night, inhaled the smell of my own cheap soap, and sat in the silence that belonged only to me, I felt a rush of euphoria so potent it nearly brought me to tears. I was free. I spent the next few years meticulously building a life that Tiffany could not touch. I saved every penny. I worked my way up at the firm. I stopped going home for holidays, claiming work deadlines. I became a ghost to them, and they barely noticed, too consumed with Tiffany's faltering attempts at internet fame. Then came the night that changed the trajectory of my life. Urban Nexus was hosting a gala to celebrate the completion of a massive skyline project. It was a black tie affair, held in the ballroom of the most expensive hotel in Chicago. I was there strictly for professional reasons, standing near the back of the room in a simple black dress I had tailored myself, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I had not invited my family, obviously, but Tiffany had found out about the event through a mutual acquaintance. She showed up uninvited, wearing a red dress that was cut specifically to draw every eye in the room. She had somehow charmed her way past security, a skill she had perfected over years of manipulating weak men. She was scanning the room like a predator, looking for wealth, for status, for someone to latch onto. I tried to make myself invisible, blending into the shadow of a large pillar. I watched as she zeroed in on the VIP section. She had her sights set on a man standing near the bar. I recognized him immediately. Everyone did. It was Gavin Sterling. Gavin was the heir to Sterling Estates, one of the largest real estate development dynasties in the Midwest. He was 34, devastatingly handsome in that classic, old money way, and currently the most eligible bachelor in the city. He was leaning against the bar, looking bored as a line of socialites tried to engage him in conversation. I watched Tiffany approach him. She flipped her hair, touched his arm, and laughed her practiced, tinkling laugh. I saw her mouth moving, likely telling him she was a model, an influencer, a creative spirit. I felt a familiar knot of shame in my stomach, waiting for him to fall for it. They always fell for it. Gavin looked at her. He smiled politely, but his eyes were vacant. He said something brief, checked his watch, and then, to my absolute shock, he turned away from her. He did not ask for her number. He did not offer to buy her a drink. He simply disengaged. Tiffany stood there, frozen, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she pivoted to find a new target. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and turned to leave, wanting to escape before she spotted me, but as I turned, I bumped straight into a solid wall of a chest. "Steady there," a deep voice said. I looked up. It was him, Gavin Sterling. "I am so sorry," I stammered, stepping back. "I was just—" "You are Shirley Pennington, aren't you?" he asked. I blinked, stunned. "Yes, how do you know my name?" "I saw your name on the blueprints for the Riverside Park renovation," Gavin said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. The lead architect tried to take credit, but I saw the initials on the structural revisions, S.P. You solved the drainage issue on the north slope with a bioswale system. It was brilliant. I stared at him. He wasn't looking at my dress. He wasn't looking at my face to judge its symmetry. He was talking about soil drainage. He was talking about my work. Thank you, I managed to say. Most developers do not look at the engineering notes. "I am not most developers," Gavin said, stepping closer, effectively blocking out the rest of the room. "And I have been looking for someone who understands that a building is only as good as its foundation. I saw you hiding behind the pillar. You looked like the only person here who wasn't trying to sell me something." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Tiffany watching us. Her mouth was slightly open, her expression a mix of confusion and dawning horror. For the first time in 20 years, the spotlight had shifted. The man she had tried to dazzle had walked right past the golden idol to talk to the glass child about structural engineering. "Can I get you a drink, Shirley?" Gavin asked, offering his arm. "I want to hear more about that bioswale." I looked at Tiffany, I looked at Gavin, and for the first time in my life, I chose myself. "I would love that," I said. Our romance did not begin with fireworks or a swell of orchestral music. It began with blueprints. In the weeks following that gala, Gavin Sterling and I did not date in the traditional sense. We merged. It was an intellectual courtship, a meeting of two minds that found a rare, synchronized rhythm amidst the chaotic noise of the city. Gavin told me later that he had fallen in love with my lack of pretense. In a world where every woman he met was curating a persona for social media or auditioning for the role of a billionaire's wife, I was refreshingly, brutally real. I ordered the cheapest wine on the menu because I actually liked the taste. I wore comfortable shoes because I walked to work. I challenged him on zoning laws and structural load-bearing limits. He called me his anchor. He told me that while everyone else wanted a piece of the Sterling legacy, I was the only one interested in the foundation. Entering Gavin's world was like stepping onto a different planet, one where the gravity was heavier and the air was thinner. Sterling Estates was not just a company, it was an empire. Gavin was the crown prince, and he carried the weight of that title with a charismatic but rigid determination. He was obsessed with legacy. It was his favorite word. Every building had to be iconic. Every public appearance had to be flawless. He was constantly aware of the lens, of the public eye. Even when we were alone. I felt like an imposter at first. I remember the first charity ball he took me to. I was wearing a dress I had rented, terrified of spilling something on it. The room was filled with people whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries. I stood stiffly by Gavin's side, clutching my clutch bag like a shield, but Gavin placed a hand on the small of my back, a warm, steady weight that grounded me. He introduced me not as his girlfriend, but as the most brilliant landscape architect in Chicago. He validated me in a room full of people who would have otherwise looked right through me. Yet, I retained my frugality. It was a reflex I could not unlearn. When we went to dinner at restaurants where the appetizers cost $50, I would instinctively scan the right side of the menu. Gavin found this charming. He would laugh, a rich, genuine sound, and tell me that I did not need to worry about the bill anymore. "You are so distinct, Shirley," he would say, looking at me with eyes that seemed to see the very bottom of my soul. "You do not need the trappings. You are the diamond. Everything else is just the setting." I believed him. I believed that he loved me for the very things my parents had despised. My practicality, my seriousness, my lack of glitter. I thought I had finally found a safe harbor. Then the storm returned. Tiffany came home. Her career in Los Angeles had imploded. The narrative she spun for our parents was one of tragic victimhood, bad agents, jealous rivals, a cruel industry that did not understand her unique spark. The reality, which I pieced together through gossip and common sense, was that she had run out of money, burned her bridges, and realized that being pretty was not a profession in a city where everyone was beautiful. She returned to Chicago broke, bitter, and hungry. I dreaded the inevitable collision of my two worlds. I delayed it as long as I could, but eventually, I had to bring Gavin to meet my parents. The dinner was held at my parents' house. My mother had spent 3 days cleaning, a frantic energy that made the house smell overwhelmingly of bleach and desperation. When Gavin parked his Aston Martin in the driveway, I saw my father peek through the curtains, his face pale with anticipation. The evening was a masterclass in humiliation. My parents were obsequious to the point of nausea. My father, usually a man of few words and simmering disappointment, was suddenly a raconteur, telling exaggerated stories about his business ventures and asking Gavin pointed questions about the real estate market. Clearly trying to fish for investment tips, my mother kept refilling Gavin's wine glass, her smile fixed and trembling, practically drooling over the cashmere of his sweater. "We always knew Shirley would do well," my mother lied, beaming at me with eyes that were hard as marbles. "But you, Gavin, you are quite the catch. We are just so honored to have you in our humble home." And then there was Tiffany. She had dressed for the occasion, not as a sister meeting her sibling's boyfriend, but as a woman on the prowl. She wore a dress that was a size too small, the fabric straining in a way that was calculated to draw the eye. Throughout dinner, she ignored me entirely. Her focus was a laser beam directed at Gavin. She laughed too loudly at his polite jokes. She leaned across the table, invading his personal space, asking him about his travels, his cars, his favorite hotels. "I have always wanted to go to the Amalfi Coast," she purred, twirling a strand of blonde hair around her finger. "Shirley hates travel. She is such a homebody, but I bet you could show a girl the real Italy, right, Gavin?" I felt the old shame rising, hot and suffocating. I waited for Gavin to be charmed. I waited for him to realize that he was sitting next to the wrong sister, that the golden idol was right there across the table. But he didn't. Gavin placed his hand over mine on the table. He looked at Tiffany with a cool, detached politeness. "Actually, Tiffany, Shirley and I are planning a trip to Kyoto to study the temple gardens. I prefer a partner who appreciates history and silence. I find the party scene in Italy rather exhausting. Tiffany's smile faltered. My parents went silent. I squeezed Gavin's hand, feeling a surge of gratitude so profound it nearly broke me. He had chosen me, again, in front of them. The proposal came 3 months later. It was perfect because it was private. There were no hidden photographers, no flash mobs, no grand public gestures meant for Instagram. Gavin took me to the rooftop of a skyscraper Sterling Estates had just finished constructing. The building was empty, a shell of steel and glass rising above the city lights. He took my hands. The wind was whipping around us, cold and sharp, but his grip was warm. I have spent my whole life building things for other people to look at, he said, his voice serious. But with you, I want to build something that no one else can touch. You are the only real thing in my life. Shirley, marry me. Let me give you the security you have never had. He opened a velvet box. Inside sat a 4-carat diamond. It was not a gaudy, trendy cut. It was an emerald cut, clean, geometric, and flawless. It looked like a block of ice that could withstand a fire. It symbolized exactly what he promised. Security, solidity, a fortress against the world. I said yes. I cried, not delicate, pretty tears, but deep, heaving sobs of relief. I finally felt safe. In the haze of happiness that followed, I made a mistake. It was a mistake born of hope, the foolish hope that my success could finally heal the fracture in my family. I wanted to bridge the gap. I wanted to share my joy. I asked Tiffany to be my maid of honor. I took her out for coffee. I showed her the ring, trying not to notice the way her eyes narrowed as she calculated its value. I know we have had our differences, Tiff, I said, reaching across the table. But I want you standing next to me. I want us to be sisters, real sisters. Tiffany looked at the ring, then at me. A slow smile spread across her face. It wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A strange, predatory expression that reminded me of a cat watching a bird land on a low branch. Of course, Shirley, she said, her voice smooth as syrup. I would love to be your maid of honor. I'll make sure your big day is unforgettable. I should have run then. I should have seen the teeth behind the smile. But I was blinded by the glare of the diamond on my finger. The wedding planning began in earnest. Gavin insisted on a short engagement. He wanted the wedding to be the social event of the season, a phrase that made me nervous. But I compromised. He was sterling. He had obligations. I let him handle the guest list and the venue, while I focused on the details that mattered to me. The music, the vows, the flowers. I wanted simple, elegant arrangements, white roses and greenery, structural, clean, and classic. About 2 months into the planning, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. A change in the catering menu here, a tweak to the color palette there. Gavin would come to me with suggestions that felt oddly specific. We were sitting in his penthouse one evening, looking over the floral samples. I pushed the photo of the white roses forward. "This is it," I said. "It feels like us." Gavin frowned, tilting his head. He picked up a different photo. It was a bouquet of stargazer lilies, loud, pink, perfumed, and overwhelming. "Are you sure about the roses, darling?" he asked. "They are a bit plain. I was thinking of something with more pop, more drama. Tiffany mentioned you might like lilies better than roses. She said they were your favorite growing up." I froze. "I hate lilies," I said, my voice dropping. "They make me sneeze, and the smell gives me a headache. I have never liked them. Why would Tiffany say that?" Gavin shrugged, dismissing my concern with a wave of his hand. "Maybe she just misremembered. She is trying to help Shirley. She has been sending me a lot of great ideas for the reception layout. She really has a good eye for visual impact. We should hear her out." "I do not want visual impact," I insisted, a cold prickle of anxiety starting at the base of my spine. "I want what we want." "Of course," Gavin said, kissing my forehead. But we have to think about the photos. Surely, the legacy. He went back to looking at the lilies, and for the first time, looking at the back of his head. I felt a draft in the room, as if a window had been left open in the middle of winter. It was the first tremor of the earthquake, but I was too in love to recognize the ground shaking beneath my feet. The descent into hell did not happen all at once. It happened in increments, in the subtle shifting of light and shadow, until I woke up one day and realized I was standing in total darkness. It was 6 months before the wedding. At Urban Nexus, I had been assigned the lead role on the obscenely large waterfront restoration project. It was the kind of career-defining opportunity that demanded 18 hours of my day. I was drowning in zoning permits, soil composition reports, and structural stress tests. My mind was a landscape of concrete and rebar, leaving very little mental real estate for the softness of wedding planning. So I did what any trusting sister would do. I delegated. I can handle the vendors. Surely, Tiffany had said, her eyes wide and helpful. You are so busy with your big important buildings. Let me do the grunt work. I have a lot of free time since I am. Between opportunities, it is the least I can do. I was so relieved, so desperate for help, that I handed her the binder. I handed her the schedule. In essence, I handed her the keys to my life, never suspecting that she would change the locks while I was at work. The red flags began to appear about 4 weeks later. They were small at first, like hairline fractures in a foundation, easily missed if you were not looking for them. The first was the smell. Gavin came over to my apartment late one Tuesday night. He said he had been at a board meeting that ran overtime. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his top button undone. When I went to hug him, burying my face in the crook of his neck to inhale the familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne, I stopped. Underneath the sandalwood, there was something else, something cloyingly sweet. It was heavy, powdery, and distinct. It smelled like burnt sugar and musk. I pulled back, my heart doing a strange, stuttering rhythm in my chest. You smell different, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Did you change your laundry detergent? Gavin stiffened. It was a micro-reaction, a tightening of the jaw that lasted less than a second. But I saw it. I do not think so, he said, walking past me to the kitchen to pour himself a drink. Must be the air freshener in the Uber. I did not take my car today. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, but the scent lingered in my nose. It was vanilla and musk. It was the signature scent Tiffany had worn since she was 16 years old. It was the smell that used to permeate my clothes when she stole them. I pushed the thought away. You are being paranoid. I told myself, Tiffany is your sister. She is your maid of honor. Gavin loves your mind. He chose you. But the detective in my brain had woken up, and she refused to go back to sleep. The second flag was the money. We had a joint credit card for wedding expenses. I usually just paid the bill without looking at the itemized list, trusting the total. But one evening, while organizing my tax documents, I logged into the bank portal. I clicked on the statement for the previous month. My eyes scanned the rows: florist, caterer deposit, venue holding fee. Those were normal. Then I saw them. The Peninsula Hotel. Consultation lunch. $350. The Langham. High tea service. $200. The Four Seasons. Spa services. $600. There were 5 charges in total, all labeled under consultations, all at high-end hotels in the city, all during the hours I was stuck at my desk at Urban Nexus. My hands started to shake. I picked up the phone and called my mother. I needed a reality check. I needed someone to tell me I was crazy. Mom, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I am looking at the wedding expenses. Tiffany has been spending a lot on meetings, at hotels. Does she really need to take the florist to the Four Seasons spa? My mother's voice was sharp on the other end of the line. Shirley, honestly, you sound hysterical. Tiffany is networking. She is using those meetings to charm the vendors into giving you discounts. That is how the world works. Not everything is done on a spreadsheet. But the amounts, Mom, I argued. And Gavin, he has been distant. He is always busy. You are being paranoid because you are insecure, my mother snapped. You have always been like this, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Gavin is a busy man. Tiffany is just helping you. Do not ruin this relationship with your petty jealousy. You are lucky to have them both. She hung up. I sat there in my cold apartment, the silence ringing in my ears. I felt a physical sickness in my gut, a heavy, leaden weight that tasted like bile. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the crazy, insecure sister, because the alternative was a truth so jagged I did not think I could survive it. The shattering happened on a Thursday. I was at a construction site on the south side, supervising the pouring of a foundation. The noise was deafening. Jackhammers, shouting foremen, the grinding of cement mixers. Suddenly, a migraine hit me like a sniper shot. My vision blurred, a jagged aura of light obscured my left eye, and nausea rolled over me in waves. I told the site manager I had to leave. It was 2 p.m. I got into my car, intending to drive back to my apartment, close the blinds, and sleep for 12 hours. But as I merged onto the highway, my hands turned the wheel in a different direction. It was not a conscious decision. It was an instinct, a magnetic pull toward the source of my anxiety. I drove to the suburbs, to my parents' house. I told myself I was just going to drop off some fabric swatches for Tiffany. That was a lie. The truth was, I needed to see if she was there. I pulled into the cul-de-sac. The house looked the same as always. Manicured lawn, pristine white siding, a monument to suburban perfection. And there, in the driveway, parked right behind my father's sedan, was a silver Aston Martin. Gavin's car. My breath stopped. I looked at the dashboard clock. 2:45 in the afternoon. Gavin was supposed to be in a meeting with the city zoning board. He complained about it to me this morning. I parked my car down the street, unable to bring myself to park next to his. I walked to the house, my boots crunching softly on the pavement. The migraine throbbed behind my eye, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I unlocked the front door. I still had a key. I stepped into the foyer. The house was silent. The smell of lemon polish and gardenia perfume was thick in the air. "Mom? Dad?" I called out softly. Silence. Their cars were gone. It was Thursday, Bridge Club Day. I walked toward the living room. The double doors were partially open. I could hear the rustle of paper, and then a voice. "No, move this wall here. Open up the sightline. It makes the space feel more grand." It was Gavin's voice, but the tone was different. It wasn't the professional, clipped tone he used with his employees. It wasn't the gentle, intellectual tone he used with me. It was low, intimate, and warm. "Like this?" Tiffany's voice answered. "God, you are a genius. Gavin, Shirley would never think of that. She is so obsessed with the rules." "Shirley lacks vision," Gavin said. "She is a technician. You are the muse." I pushed the door open. The scene before me was not the torrid bedroom scene of a soap opera. In a way, it was infinitely worse. It was a domestic tableau that erased my existence entirely. They were sitting on the expensive Persian rug in the center of the living room. Papers were spread out all around them. Large, architectural blueprints. A bottle of wine was open. 2 glasses. Gavin was in his shirt sleeves, leaning back on his hands. Tiffany was lying on her stomach next to him, her legs kicked up in the air. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized. It was the one I had bought for my honeymoon. Gavin's hand was resting casually on the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her blonde hair. It was a gesture of such casual, established ownership that it knocked the air out of my lungs. They froze when they saw me. For 10 seconds. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "Shirley," Gavin said. He didn't jump up. He didn't scramble to cover himself. He simply removed his hand from Tiffany's neck and sat up straighter, his face settling into a mask of annoyed composure. Tiffany sat up, pulling the robe tighter, though the smirk on her face betrayed her lack of shame. "You are home early," she said. "We were just working." I walked into the room. My legs felt like they were made of wood. I looked down at the blueprints spread on the floor. My heart stopped. They weren't just random blueprints, they were my drafts. They were the preliminary sketches for the Sterling Heights luxury condo project, a project Gavin had told me was on hold. I recognized the bioswale system. I recognized the unique cantilevered balconies I had spent 3 weeks designing. But in the bottom corner of the title block, where the lead architect's name should be, the space had been filled in with fresh ink. Interior concept by Tiffany Pennington. The room spun. The betrayal hit me on 2 fronts. A pincer movement of devastation. He was sleeping with my sister, yes, but he was also stealing my mind. "You stole my work," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, like it was coming from underwater. Gavin stood up, brushing lint off his trousers. He looked at me with a cold, appraisal-like stare, the same way he looked at a building he planned to demolish. "Do not be dramatic, Shirley," he said calmly. "I did not steal it. We are a team, remember? What is yours is mine." "You put her name on it," I pointed at the paper, my finger shaking. "She cannot even draw a straight line. Gavin, she is a failed influencer." "She has the aesthetic," Gavin countered, his voice rising slightly. "Look, Shirley, let us be adults here. You are brilliant. I have never denied that. But you are boring. You are too work-obsessed. You're always covered in dust. You do not know how to play the game." He gestured to Tiffany, who was now standing next to him, looking at me with triumph radiating from her pores. "The Sterling brand is about glamour," Gavin continued. "It is about aspiration. When we launch this project, I need a wife who can stand next to me on a magazine cover and make people want to buy the lifestyle. Tiffany is the face. You are the engine. I thought you would be happy to stay behind the scenes where you are comfortable." "Happy?" I choked out. "You are sleeping with her. You are using my designs and giving her the credit, and you are sleeping with my sister." "It just happened," Tiffany chimed in, stepping closer to Gavin and linking her arm through his. "We have so much in common. Shirley, Gavin needs someone who understands passion. You are just so cold. We didn't want to hurt you. We were going to tell you after the wedding." "After the wedding?" I screamed. "You were going to marry me and keep her as your mistress?" "It is a partnership," Gavin said, as if discussing a merger. "I need your brain, Shirley. I need your stability, but I need Tiffany's spark. It could have worked. We could have kept it all in the family." The horror of his logic was suffocating. He saw me as a utility, a drafter, a tool to be used and put back in the box. I turned to leave. I had to get out. The air in the room was toxic. But as I reached the doorway, the front door opened. My parents walked in. My mother was carrying a shopping bag. My father was holding his golf clubs. They stopped, looking at the scene. Me, shaking and pale, tears streaming down my face. Gavin and Tiffany standing together, defiant and united. The blueprints on the floor, the open wine. "Shirley?" my mother asked. "What is going on?" "Ask them," I spat out. "Ask your golden child what she is doing with my fiancé." My mother looked at Tiffany. Tiffany didn't flinch. She just looked at Mom and gave a small, helpless shrug. "He loves me. Mom, we tried to stop it, but we are soulmates." My mother looked at Gavin. Gavin nodded respectfully. "I am sorry it came out this way, Mrs. Pennington, but my feelings for Tiffany are undeniable. And frankly, Shirley has been very difficult lately, very unstable." I waited. I waited for my father to roar. I waited for my mother to slap Tiffany. I waited for the people who raised me to defend me. My mother set her shopping bag down. She looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my messy hair, my work boots, my tear-stained face. Then she looked at Gavin, the millionaire, the savior of their financial woes. And she looked at Tiffany, the beautiful, perfect doll. "Shirley," my mother said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Lower your voice. The neighbors will hear." "Did you hear what I said?" I cried. "He is cheating on me, with her." "Gavin is a powerful man," my mother said, walking past me to stand near the fireplace, aligning herself physically with the group on the rug. He has needs. He needs a wife who can support his social standing. You were always too rough around the edges. Shirley, you do not know how to host. You do not know how to dress. My father wouldn't even look at me. He was studying the pattern on the wallpaper. Don't ruin this for your sister, my mother said, delivering the final blow with surgical precision. Tiffany finally has a chance at a real future. Gavin is willing to take care of everyone. If you make a scene, if you try to sue him or cause a scandal, you will destroy this family. Just go. Let them be happy. I looked at them, the four of them, a perfect, rot-filled tableau. The parents who sold me, the sister who stole from me, the lover who used me. I didn't scream. The scream died in my throat, choked off by the sheer weight of the betrayal. I realized then that I wasn't losing a family. I never had one to begin with. I turned around and walked out the door. Behind me, I heard the sound of a wine glass clinking against another. A toast to the future, to the execution of Shirley Pennington. I got into my car. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a fiancé. I didn't have a family. But as I drove away, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror, I realized I still had the one thing they couldn't steal, because they didn't even know its value. I had the truth, and one day, I would use it to bury them. The city of Chicago died to me on a Tuesday morning, buried not under earth, but under a suffocating layer of newsprint and digital headlines. I canceled the wedding formally, sending a registered letter to the vendors, but before the ink was even dry on my signature, the Sterling machine had already begun to pave over the truth. The press release went out at 9 o'clock. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It stated that Gavin Sterling and Shirley Pennington had reached a mutual and amicable separation due to diverging career paths and personal goals. It painted a picture of two mature professionals nodding politely at a fork in the road. There was no mention of the affair, no mention of the stolen blueprints, no mention of my sister, who was currently playing house in the mansion I was supposed to live in. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go to the press, but I learned very quickly that the truth is a luxury only the rich can afford. 2 hours after the press release, I was called into the office of the senior partner at Urban Nexus, David, a man who had mentored me, who had praised my bioswale designs just weeks ago, could not even look me in the eye. He stared at a spot on his mahogany desk, fiddling with a silver paperweight. "I am sorry, Shirley," he said, his voice small. "We have to let you go." "On what grounds?" I asked. My voice was calm, dead calm. I felt like I was made of ice. "Restructuring," David lied. Then he sighed, a heavy, defeated sound, and looked up at me. "Look, I will be honest because I respect you. Gavin called. He threatened to pull the waterfront contract and the Skyline bid if you remained on the payroll. That is 40% of our annual revenue. Shirley, I have 50 other employees to think about. I cannot sink the firm for one person." "So he is blacklisting me," I stated. "He said you were volatile," David said, grimacing. "He has reached out to the other major firms in the city too. The word is out. You are radioactive in Chicago." I walked out of that office with a cardboard box in my hands. I did not cry. Crying implies hope, a belief that tears might change something. I had no such illusions. I felt a coldness settling into the marrow of my bones, a permanent winter taking hold of my internal landscape. I went home to my apartment and began the severance. I did not just cut ties. I cauterized them. I took my phone and blocked every number associated with the Pennington or Sterling name. My mother, my father, Tiffany, Gavin, even the few mutual friends who I knew would just report back to them. I erased them electronically, and then I erased them physically. I sold everything, my furniture, my books, the few nice dresses I had bought for the engagement parties. I sold my car. I wanted to be light. I wanted to be untethered. I wanted to disappear. I chose Boston not because I loved it, but because it was old, cold, and serious. It was a city of brick and granite, not the glass and steel flashiness of Chicago. It felt like a place where a person could hide in plain sight. I arrived with 2 suitcases and a bank account that was rapidly draining. I rented a basement apartment in a brownstone in South Boston. It was 400 square feet of damp concrete and exposed pipes. The windows were high, narrow slits that looked out onto the sidewalk, offering a view of nothing but passing ankles and slush. It smelled of mold and wet wool. It was a tomb, and it was exactly what I wanted. Finding work was harder than I expected. The blacklisting was specific to Chicago, but the gap in my resume and the abrupt departure raised eyebrows. I finally landed a job at a small, struggling firm called Ironclad Designs. Ironclad was the antithesis of Urban Nexus. It was located in a converted warehouse that smelled of stale coffee and toner. The owner, a weary man named Frank, didn't care about my pedigree or my volatile reputation. He just needed someone who could draw fast and didn't ask for a lot of money. I took the job as a basic drafter. It was a demotion of insulting proportions. I went from leading multi-million-dollar projects to drawing bathroom renovations and parking lot expansions. But I did not complain. I did not speak. I became a machine. For a year, I lived in a state of functional depression. I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I drank black coffee. I walked to the train station in the biting wind. I worked. I came home. I stared at the ceiling of my basement apartment until exhaustion dragged me under. I worked 16 hours a day, not because Frank asked me to, but because silence was my enemy. If I stopped working, I started thinking. And if I started thinking, I would think about the way my mother looked when she chose Gavin over me. I would think about the sound of Tiffany's laugh. I would think about the humiliation that was waiting for me if I ever let my guard down again. So I filled the silence with lines. I poured my grief into AutoCAD. I turned my anger into geometry. I trusted no one. When coworkers asked me about happy hour, I declined. When Frank asked about my family, I told him they were dead. In a way, it wasn't a lie. I became a ghost again, but this time, I was a ghost made of steel. The turning point came in November. During a particularly brutal stretch of freezing rain, Ironclad Designs was on the brink of bankruptcy. We had lost 3 bids in a row. The mood in the office was funeral. Then the call came. A holding company called Orion Holdings was soliciting bids for a massive restoration project. They had purchased a derelict textile factory in the Seaport District, a hulking, crumbling brick beast from the 19th century, and wanted to convert it into a mixed-use space without losing its historical soul. Most firms wouldn't touch it. The structural liability alone was a nightmare. The building was rotting from the inside out. Frank was going to pass. "We do not have the manpower," he said, rubbing his tired eyes, "and we do not have the expertise for that level of historical preservation." I stood up from my desk. It was the first time I had spoken in a meeting in 6 months. "I can do it," I said. My voice sounded rusty to my own ears. Frank looked at me. "Surely. This is a $20 million renovation. You are a drafter." "I am a licensed landscape architect and structural engineer with a specialization in urban renewal," I said, my tone flat and hard. "I led the Riverside Park project in Chicago before I moved here. Give me the files. I will write the proposal tonight." Frank looked at me for a long time. He saw something in my face, perhaps the sheer, jagged edge of my desperation, and he nodded. I worked for 48 hours straight. I did not sleep. I pulled the original blueprints of the factory from the city archives. I analyzed the load-bearing columns. I designed a reinforcement system that used exposed steel beams to support the rotting timber, turning the structural weakness into an aesthetic feature. We submitted the bid. 2 weeks later, Orion Holdings accepted. Ironclad was saved, and I was made the project lead. I did not celebrate. I simply packed my gear and went to the site. The job site became my world. I was ruthless. I had no patience for laziness or incompetence. The contractors, a rough crew used to pushing around uncertain architects, quickly learned that I was not to be trifled with. I knew the code better than they did. I knew the cost of materials down to the cent. If they tried to overcharge or cut corners, I eviscerated them with cold, mathematical precision. I wore steel-toed boots and a hard hat. My face scrubbed clean of makeup. My hair pulled back in a severe knot. I was not there to be liked. I was there to build something that would not fall down. It was a Tuesday in late November when the incident happened. The weather was atrocious. A freezing rain was lashing down from the harbor, turning the construction site into a mud pit. The wind howled through the skeleton of the factory, rattling the scaffolding. I was doing a site inspection on the third floor. I had noticed a discrepancy in the cement mixture logs for the foundation reinforcement. I found the foreman, a burly man named Miller, smoking a cigarette under a tarp. "You are using a Type N mortar mix for the load-bearing wall," I shouted over the sound of the wind. I held the invoice in my hand, the wet paper flapping. "The specs call for Type S. Type N cannot handle the compression load of this steel." Miller rolled his eyes, dropping his cigarette into a puddle. "It is fine, lady. The supplier was out of It is basically the same thing. You are over-engineering this." "It is not the same thing." I stepped closer, invading his space. I did not care that he was a foot taller than me. Type N has a compressive strength of 750 pounds per square inch. Type S is 1,800. If you pour that concrete, this wall will buckle within 5 years. You are ripping it out. "I am not ripping out 3 days of work," Miller spat back. "Who do you think you are? You are just some drafter." "I am the project lead," I hissed, my voice cutting through the storm like a razor. "And you will rip it out, or I will have your license pulled for gross negligence. I will not let you build a tomb and call it a renovation. Do you understand me? I want that wall gone by tomorrow morning, or you will be fired." I was shaking, not from fear, but from a rage that had been simmering in me for a year. I was tired of people lying. I was tired of people taking the easy way out. Miller stared at me, seeing the absolute, unyielding resolve in my eyes. He swore, kicked a bucket, and walked away to yell at his crew. I stood there, breathing hard, the rain plastering my hair to my skull. I felt wild and feral. Then, I felt eyes on me. I turned around. Standing near the edge of the exposed floor, watching me from the shadows of a brick archway, was a man. He was wearing a long black wool coat that was soaked through at the shoulders. He wasn't wearing a hard hat. He wasn't holding a clipboard. He was just standing there, perfectly still, like a statue carved from the darkness itself. He had a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite, sharp angles, a strong jaw, and eyes that were dark and unreadable. He didn't look like a construction worker. He didn't look like an investor. He looked dangerous. He took a step toward me, his boots making no sound on the wet concrete. "You are right about the mortar," he said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that I felt in my chest more than I heard. Type N would have cracked in the first frost. I wiped the rain from my eyes, bracing myself. "Who are you?" I demanded. "This is a closed site. You need a helmet." He ignored the command. He just kept walking until he was standing 3 feet away from me. He looked at the wall I had just condemned. Then he looked back at me. He wasn't looking at my body. He wasn't looking at the rain soaking my clothes. He was looking at my eyes, with a strange, intense curiosity. "Most architects would have let that slide," he said. "They would have taken the bribe or the easy excuse." "I am not most architects," I snapped, defensive and cold. "If the foundation is a lie, the building falls. It is that simple." The man's lips twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was an acknowledgement. "Yes," he said softly, "it is." He extended a hand. His hand was large, engulfed in a black leather glove. "Lucas Thorne," he said, "I own this building." Lucas Thorne was not a man who occupied space. He anchored it. Standing there in the freezing rain, offering me his gloved hand, he didn't radiate the frantic, buzzing energy that Gavin always had, the energy of a man constantly trying to sell you something. Lucas possessed a stillness that was almost unnerving. It was the stillness of a mountain, or a predatory animal waiting for the exact moment to strike. I took his hand. His grip was firm, brief, and dry despite the weather. "You own Orion Holdings?" I asked, my voice fighting to remain steady against the wind. "I thought Orion was a board of faceless investors." "It is," Lucas said, withdrawing his hand and looking up at the skeletal remains of the factory roof. "But I make the decisions. And right now, my decision is to get out of this weather before we both catch pneumonia. My car is around the back. We need to review the structural modifications you just screamed at that foreman about." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. We relocated to the makeshift site office, a trailer that smelled of wet blueprints and stale coffee. Lucas removed his coat, revealing a charcoal suit that was impeccably tailored but lacked any designer logos. He didn't wear a watch that cost as much as a house. He didn't have perfectly coiffed hair. It was dark, thick, and slightly messy from the wind. He looked like he had been carved out of something durable. He pulled up a chair, sat opposite me, and laid the blueprints on the table. "Explain the truss system on the 3rd floor," he said, skipping the pleasantries entirely. "You are keeping the original 19th century timber beams. Why? It is cheaper to rip them out and replace them with steel I-beams. It is faster, too. Why save the wood?" I looked at him. This was the test. Gavin would have asked me if the wood looked rustic enough for the marketing brochure. Lucas was asking about economics and physics. "Because the wood has been cured for over 100 years, I answered, tapping the paper with my pencil. "It is an old-growth pine. It is denser than any timber you can buy today. If we rip it out, we destabilize the lateral bracing of the exterior brick walls. We would have to install an external exoskeleton to hold the building up, which would cost 3 times as much as restoring the timber. Plus, the thermal mass of the wood helps regulate the internal temperature. Lowering your long-term HVAC costs by about 15%. I stopped, waiting for him to interrupt, to tell me I was boring him with the math. Lucas didn't blink. He studied the drawing. Then he looked at me. A slow, genuine appreciation dawned in his eyes. "Efficiency," he said quietly, "and historical integrity is used as a structural asset. I like it." "I do not do it for the charm," I said defensively. "I do it because it works." "I can see that," Lucas replied. He leaned back. "You are the first architect I have hired in 10 years who knows the price of a heating bill. Most of them just want to build glass boxes that look good on a website." That was the beginning. Over the next 6 months, Lucas Thorne became a fixture in my life. At first, it was strictly professional. He would show up at the site unannounced, always watching, always asking questions. He wasn't micromanaging. He was learning. He wanted to know how the tension cables worked. He wanted to understand the load distribution of the foundation. We started going for coffee after site inspections. It wasn't a date. It was a debrief. We would sit in a small, greasy diner near the docks, drinking black coffee that tasted like battery acid, and argue about urban density and zoning laws. I learned that Lucas was 40 years old and existed in a different stratosphere of wealth than the Sterlings. The Sterlings were new money, loud, desperate to be seen, constantly leveraging their assets to buy more shiny things. Lucas was something else. He was old money combined with a shark's intelligence. He was a vulture capitalist, but one with a code. He bought failing companies, manufacturers, logistics firms, old industries that the tech world had forgotten, and he fixed them. He stripped away the bloat, fired the incompetent management, and made them profitable again. Or, if they were too far gone, he sold them for parts. He was ruthless, but he was honest. He never lied about what he was doing. "I am not a creator, Shirley," he told me one night. We had graduated from coffee to dinner at a quiet steakhouse. No paparazzi, no scene, just dark wood and hushed conversation. "I am a mechanic. I fix broken engines. You are a creator. You take empty space and give it meaning." "I just arrange dirt and steel," I deflected. Looking down at my wine glass, I was still terrified of compliments. They felt like traps. "Do not do that," Lucas said, his voice dropping an octave. "Do not minimize your competence. False modesty is just as annoying as arrogance." I looked up, startled by his bluntness. "I value two things above all else, Shirley," he said, holding my gaze. "Competence and loyalty. You have an abundance of the first. I am curious about the second." "I am loyal to the work," I said. "And to yourself?" he asked. "You wear your isolation like a suit of armor. Who hurt you?" It was a personal question, the kind I usually deflected with a cold stare, but looking at Lucas, with his steady hands and his granite face, I felt a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion. I was tired of carrying the weight of my past alone. "I was engaged," I said, my voice tight, "to a man who wanted a trophy, not a partner. My sister decided she wanted him, so she took him, and my parents, they helped her pack her bags." I took a sip of wine, waiting for the pity. "He told me I was too boring," I continued, forcing the words out. "He said I was a technician, and he needed a face for his brand. I was replaced by a shinier model." Lucas didn't offer me a tissue. He didn't reach across the table to pat my hand condescendingly. He just nodded, as if I had stated a simple equation. "Gold is shiny," Lucas said, his voice flat and hard. "It is soft. You can bend it with your teeth. It is useless for anything other than decoration." He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Steel is not shiny. It is gray. It is cold. But steel holds up the building. If I have to choose between a golden roof and a steel column, I choose the steel every time. The roof is vanity. The column is survival." I felt a lump form in my throat, hot and painful. It was the first time anyone had looked at my hardness and called it a virtue. "You are not boring, Shirley," he added softly. "You are substantial. There is a difference." We started dating quietly, almost invisibly. There was no announcement, no relationship status update on social media. Lucas despised the digital world. "If it is not real enough to touch," he would say, "it is not real." Our courtship was a series of quiet moments stitched together. We spent weekends at his cabin in Maine. It wasn't a sprawling resort. It was a simple, rugged structure made of cedar and stone, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. There was no television. The cell service was spotty. We would spend hours just reading in the same room. I would be sketching by the fire, and he would be reading financial reports or a biography of Churchill. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was comfortable. It was the silence of two people who did not need to perform for each other. I began to heal. The jagged edges of my insecurity started to smooth out. I stopped checking Gavin's Instagram. I stopped wondering if I was enough. With Lucas, I didn't have to be fun or glamorous. I just had to be me. Professionally, I flourished. The textile factory project was a massive success. It won 3 architectural awards for sustainable preservation. Lucas didn't take the credit. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, he pushed me to the microphone. "It is her vision," he told the press, standing in the back, arms crossed. "I just paid the bills." With Lucas's backing, I finally left Ironclad Designs. I didn't want to work for anyone else ever again. I opened my own boutique firm, Pennington Arch. It was small, just me and 2 junior drafters, but it was mine. Lucas gave me a retainer contract for all of Orion Holdings' properties, but he insisted I take other clients too. "I want you to be independent," he said. "I never want you to feel like you owe me. We are equals, or we are nothing." 3 years passed. 3 years of hard work, quiet love, and rebuilding my soul brick by brick. Then came the night in October. Lucas asked me to meet him at a property in the historic Beacon Hill district of Boston. It was an old library that had been shut down for a decade. A beautiful, crumbling Gothic revival building that I had admired every time we walked past it. It was raining again, a soft, misty rain that made the cobblestones shine. I found Lucas standing by the front doors. He unlocked them with a heavy brass key and ushered me inside. The interior was dusty, smelling of old paper and shadows. Shafts of moonlight cut through the high, stained glass windows. "Why are we here?" I asked, my voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "Did you buy this?" It is going to be a nightmare to bring up the code. I did buy it, Lucas said. He walked to the center of the room and turned to face me. But not for Orion Holdings. He reached into his coat pocket. My heart did a traitorous little flip. Was this it? Was he going to pull out a ring box? Was he going to ask me to be his wife? He pulled out a folded piece of thick, legal paper. He handed it to me. I unfolded it. It was a property deed. Transfer of title. The Beacon Hill Athenaeum. Owner, Shirley Pennington. I stared at the paper. My hands started to tremble. This building was worth millions. Lucas, I whispered. I cannot accept this. This is... Read the bottom, he said. I looked down. Under the legal jargon, in his distinctive, sharp handwriting, he had written a note. For the headquarters of Pennington Arch, and for our home, on the top floor, if you want it. He reached into his pocket again. This time, he pulled out a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It wasn't a ruby. It was a simple, heavy band of brushed platinum. No gems, no sparkle. Just an unbroken circle of the strongest metal on earth. He didn't kneel. That wasn't his style. He stepped close to me, taking my hand and pressing the cool metal into my palm. I do not want to give you a rock, Shirley, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Rocks can be lost. They can be stolen. I want to give you walls. I want to give you a roof. I want to give you a place where no one can ever evict you again. He looked around the dark, dusty library, then back at me. Build our life here, he said. Marry me. Be my partner. Be my steel. I looked at the deed. I looked at the platinum band. And then I looked at the man who saw the ghost in the glass and decided to build a house around her so she would never be transparent again. Yes, I said, my voice cracking. Yes, I will build it with you. We stood there in the dark, surrounded by the smell of dust and potential, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I felt like I was standing on solid ground. But as Lucas kissed me, sealing the promise, neither of us knew that the past wasn't done with me yet. 300 miles away, in Chicago, the foundation of the Sterling Empire was beginning to crack, and the tremors were about to reach us. The library in Beacon Hill was no longer just a building. It was a sanctuary carved from stone and silence. Over the last 3 years, Lucas and I had transformed it. The bottom 2 floors housed the offices of Pennington Arch, a space buzzing with the quiet, focused energy of architects who cared more about structural integrity than magazine covers. The top floor was ours. It was a loft that spanned the entire length of the building, bathed in the soft, diffused light that filtered through the restored stained glass windows. We had built a life here that felt impenetrable. In Boston, we were known, but we were not consumed. We attended the necessary galas for the Preservation Society. We donated to the library fund, and we hosted intimate dinners for Lucas's business associates, but we never appeared in the gossip columns. We were not the couple you saw stumbling out of clubs at 2 a.m. We were the couple you saw walking a golden retriever in the public garden at 6 a.m, coffee in hand, discussing the implications of the Federal Reserve's latest interest rate hike. It was a quiet power, and I had learned that quiet power is infinitely more dangerous than the loud kind. Lucas's true influence had slowly revealed itself to me over the course of our marriage. I knew he was wealthy when I met him, but I had not understood the mechanics of it. Lucas was not just an investor. He was a market maker. He sat on the boards of logistics conglomerates, steel manufacturers, and shipping fleets. He moved the invisible levers that kept the economy functioning. I had seen him take a phone call in his pajamas, sipping an espresso, and with 3 sentences, redirect a fleet of cargo ships to avoid a hurricane, saving a mid-sized company from bankruptcy. Why do you not brag about it? I asked him once, watching him hang up the phone and casually return to his crossword puzzle. Gavin used to frame his press releases. Lucas had looked up, his eyes dark and amused. Because, Shirley, if you have to tell people you are powerful, you are not. Real power is the ability to change the outcome without anyone knowing you were in the room. He used that power with a terrifying ethical rigidity. He destroyed CEOs who embezzled pension funds. He saved factories that were the lifeblood of small towns. Even when the profit margins were razor thin, he was a gardener of the financial world, pruning the rot so the healthy roots could survive. And now, we were preparing to plant a new root of our own. I was 12 weeks pregnant. We hadn't told anyone yet, not his board, not my staff, and certainly not the family I had excised from my life like a tumor. It was our secret, a warm, golden ember I carried in my belly every morning. I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror, turning to the side to look for the slightest curve. Pressing my hand against the flat plane of my stomach, I felt a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. This child would never know what it was like to be a glass child. This child would be made of steel and love. It was a Tuesday evening, raining as it always seemed to be in Boston. A weather pattern I had come to love for the excuse it gave us to stay indoors. I was sitting on the velvet sofa in our living room, my legs tucked under me, an iPad resting on my knees. Lucas was across the room at his desk. The soft scratch of his fountain pen on paper the only sound in the loft. I should have been reviewing the schematics for a new brownstone renovation. Instead, I was doing the one thing I had promised myself I would stop doing. I was looking at Instagram. I had a burner account, a faceless profile with 0 followers, which I used solely to peer through the digital window into the life I had left behind. I pulled up Tiffany's profile. On the surface, it was a kaleidoscope of perfection. There were photos of her and Gavin on a yacht in Miami, photos of her posing with designer bags, photos of their dream home in the suburbs. The captions were always breathless and filled with emojis. Living my best life with my soulmate. So blessed. Another day in paradise. But I was an architect. I was trained to look for stress fractures, and I saw them everywhere. I zoomed in on the photo of the yacht. It wasn't a private charter. I recognized the lanyard around Gavin's neck. It was a group tour pass. They were on a crowded excursion boat, carefully cropped to look exclusive. I scrolled down. Tiffany was no longer posting about high-end fashion partnerships. Instead, her feed was cluttered with sponsored posts for skinny tea and a dubious cryptocurrency app. Hey guys, use code Tiffany20 for 20% off this miracle detox. People with money do not sell laxative tea on the internet. Then I checked the real estate listings for Cook County. I had a saved search for Gavin's properties. I watched as the portfolio of Sterling estates slowly bled out. 2 commercial properties sold last month at a loss. The vacation home in Lake Geneva was listed for sale 3 days ago, priced desperately low for a quick cash sale. Gavin looked different in the recent photos, too. He looked bloated, his face puffy and red, the hairline receding faster than nature intended. The stress was eating him alive. He looked like a man holding up a crumbling ceiling with his bare hands. "You are doing it again," a deep voice said. I jumped, guiltily snapping the cover of the iPad shut. Lucas was standing behind the sofa. I hadn't heard him walk over. He moved like a ghost when he wanted to. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his thumb rubbing the tension knot at the base of my neck. "Why do you torture yourself looking at the wreckage? It is like staring at a car crash." "I am not torturing myself," I said, leaning back into his touch. "I am monitoring the structural integrity of the opposition." Lucas chuckled, a low rumble. He walked around the sofa and sat down next to me, taking the iPad from my hands. He opened it, looking at the frozen image of Tiffany holding a packet of diet tea with a forced, manic smile. "They are drowning," Lucas observed dispassionately. "Sterling Estates is over-leveraged. I heard whispers in the market that Gavin took out a massive high-interest loan to cover the operating costs of that failed resort in Florida. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Paul is coming to collect." "I figured," I said softly. "Tiffany is selling diet tea. She used to make fun of influencers who did that." Lucas looked at me, his expression serious. "Does seeing them fail make you happy?" I thought about it. I thought about the rage that had consumed me in that living room 3 years ago. I thought about the way they had looked at me, like I refused to be discarded. "No," I said honestly. "It does not make me happy. It makes me feel relieved. It confirms that I was right, that their foundation was rotten. But I do not wake up wishing them harm. I just wake up glad that I am not them." I placed my hand on my stomach. "Happiness is the best revenge. Lucas, we have this. We have the library. We have a baby. That is enough." Lucas smiled, but it was a sharp, wolfish smile, the smile of the market maker. "You are a better person than I am, Shirley," he said, kissing my temple. "Happiness is indeed the best revenge, but sometimes justice is a nice side dish, especially when it is served cold." Before I could ask him what he meant, the phone rang. It wasn't Lucas's phone, it was mine. I stared at it. It was sitting on the coffee table, buzzing angrily. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in 3 years. "Dad." The room went deadly silent. The vibration of the phone against the wood sounded like a drill. "You do not have to answer that," Lucas said, his voice instantly protective. "Blocks do not always hold if they get a new number. I can block this one too." I stared at the screen. My father never called. He was a coward who let my mother do the talking. If he was calling, something was catastrophically wrong. My hand reached out, trembling slightly. I picked it up. I swiped green. "Hello?" My voice was steady, conditioned by years of boardroom negotiations. "Shirley?" The voice on the other end was unrecognizable. It was cracked, wet, and terrified. "Shirley, is that you?" "It is me, Dad," I said. "Why are you calling?" "It is your mother," he sobbed. He broke down completely, a jagged, ugly sound of a man who has lost his compass. "She had a stroke, massive. This morning, the doctors. They say there is no brain activity. They are moving her to hospice care tonight. They say it is a matter of days, maybe hours." I felt nothing. I waited for the grief to hit me, for the tears to spring to my eyes, but there was only a vast, empty silence. My mother, the woman who had criticized my hair, my career, my very existence, was dying. And all I could think about was the fact that I had a meeting with a structural engineer in the morning. "I see," I said. "I am sorry to hear that." "You have to come home," my father pleaded. "Please, Shirley, she asked for you. Before she lost consciousness, she said your name." I closed my eyes. That was the hook, the final manipulation. She asked for you, even in death. She knew exactly which button to press. "I cannot," I said. "I live in Boston now. I have a life. I cannot just drop everything." "Please," he begged. "We are all alone here. Tiffany is useless. She is falling apart. Gavin is nowhere to be found. I need you. Shirley, you are the strong one. You were always the strong one. You are the strong one." The same curse they had whispered to me my entire childhood to justify their neglect. "I will think about it," I said, and hung up. I dropped the phone on the cushion and put my face in my hands. I felt Lucas's arms go around me, pulling me into his chest. I breathed in the scent of him, cedar, rain, and safety. "She is dying," I mumbled into his shirt. "My mother." "I gathered," Lucas said softly. "He wants me to come back," I said. "He says I am the strong one. He wants me to come fix it, just like always. They break everything, and they call Shirley to bring the glue." "You do not have to go," Lucas said. "We can stay right here. We can turn off the phones. We can order takeout and read books. You owe them nothing. Not your time, not your grief, and certainly not your strength." I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain beat against the stained glass. I thought about the baby growing inside me. I thought about the kind of mother I wanted to be. I wanted to be a mother who faced things. I wanted to be a mother who did not run from ghosts, but walked right through them. If I didn't go, I would always wonder. The lack of closure would be a hairline fracture in my new life. I needed to see it. I needed to see that the monster was just a frail, dying woman, I needed to bury the past properly so it wouldn't haunt my future. I pulled back and looked at Lucas. I have to go, I said. Not for them. For me. I need to close the door. Lucas nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He simply stood up and reached for his phone. Then we go, he said. You do not have to come, I said. It will be a circus. Tiffany will be there. It will be toxic. Lucas stopped dialing and looked at me. His expression was fierce, a look of absolute, unshakable resolve. Surely, he said, his voice low and intense. You are carrying my child. You are my wife. You are my partner. You face nothing alone anymore. If you are walking back into the snake pit, I am walking in with you, and I am wearing my heavy boots. He put the phone to his ear. Prepare the jet, he said to whoever was on the other end. We are flying to Chicago in 2 hours. Have the car waiting on the tarmac. 2 hours later, we were in the air. I sat in the cream-colored leather seat of Lucas's Gulfstream, watching the lights of Boston fade into the darkness below. I rarely used the jet. I preferred commercial flights because they felt more grounded, more normal. But tonight, I was grateful for the insulation. Lucas sat across from me, reviewing a file he had pulled from his briefcase. He looked calm, granite steady, the anchor I needed in the coming storm. I placed my hand on my stomach. I was going back to the city that had broken me. I was going back to the house where I had been erased. I was going back to face the sister who stole my life and the man who discarded me. But I wasn't the same woman who had driven away in tears 3 years ago. I wasn't the glass child anymore. I was the architect of my own life. I had money. I had power. I had a husband who would burn the world down to keep me warm. I looked out the window at the black void of the night sky. Get ready, Chicago. I thought, the ghost is coming home, and she is bringing the storm with her. Chicago did not welcome me back with open arms. It greeted me with a slap of wet, freezing wind that smelled of exhaust and old lake water. As the private car glided away from the tarmac and merged onto the highway, I watched the skyline approach. In the past, those towering silhouettes had intimidated me. They were monuments to money and power, things I felt I lacked. Now, sitting next to Lucas in the back seat of a sedan that cost more than my parents' house, I saw them differently. They were just piles of steel and glass, and I knew exactly how to dismantle them. We did not go to the family home in the suburbs. That was a boundary I had drawn in permanent marker before we even left Boston. We checked into the Four Seasons downtown. The suite was impersonal, luxurious, and crucially, neutral territory. Do you want to rest? Lucas asked as the bellhop set down our bags. No, I said, checking my reflection in the hallway mirror. I smoothed the lapels of my coat. It was a tailored piece from a boutique in Milan. Cashmere wool in a shade of deep charcoal. It was armor. If we stop moving, I might lose the nerve. Let us go to the hospital. The drive to the hospital was silent. Lucas held my hand, his thumb tracing the platinum band on my finger. He did not offer platitudes. He knew I didn't need them. The hospital was a sprawling complex on the edge of the city. We navigated the labyrinth of antiseptic corridors, following the signs for the intensive care unit. The air smelled of floor wax and rubbing alcohol, a scent that instantly triggered a phantom headache behind my eyes. When we reached the waiting area outside the ICU, the first thing I saw was the chaos. My father was sitting in a plastic chair, his head in his hands. He looked small. That was the first shock. The man who had loomed so large in my childhood. The patriarch who had dictated the terms of my worth had shrunk. His shirt was wrinkled, stained with what looked like coffee. His hair, usually dyed a fierce, unnatural black, was showing inch-long roots of defeated gray. He was vibrating with anxiety, his leg bouncing up and down. And then there were the others. Tiffany was pacing near the vending machines. From a distance, she still looked like the golden child. But as I drew closer, the illusion fractured. She looked expensive, but worn, like a display garment that had been handled by too many customers. She was wearing a Chanel tweed jacket that I recognized from a collection 2 years ago. It was slightly too tight across the shoulders, and the hem was beginning to fray. Her hair was blonde, but it lacked the expensive, glossy sheen of regular salon treatments. It looked brittle. Her face was gaunt, the cheekbones sharp enough to cut, and there were dark circles under her eyes that even heavy concealer could not hide. She looked tired, not sleepy tired, but soul tired. Gavin was standing by the window, his back to the room, talking into his phone. He looked bloated. The sharp jawline that had once graced the society pages was gone, buried under a layer of stress-induced weight. His suit jacket was strained at the buttons. He was sweating, despite the chill of the hospital air. I stopped 10 feet away. Lucas stopped beside me, a silent sentinel in his dark, unbranded wool coat. "Dad," I said. My father's head snapped up. His eyes, rimmed with red, widened. "Shirley, you came." He stood up shakily, looking like he wanted to hug me but was afraid to bridge the distance. At the sound of my name, Tiffany spun around, her eyes locked onto me, and for a split second, I saw the old calculation. She scanned me from head to toe, assessing the cost of my coat, the cut of my trousers, the glow of my skin. She registered the upgrade immediately. "Shirley!" she cried out, pitching her voice high and breathless. A performance for the nurses at the station. She rushed toward me, arms open wide. "Oh my God! You are here! We have been so worried!" She tried to envelop me in a hug, to pull me into the circle of shared grief, to pretend that the last 3 years of silence had just been a minor misunderstanding. I did not embrace her. I did not even raise my hands. I simply took one precise step to the left. Tiffany's arms closed in empty air. She stumbled slightly, catching her balance. She looked at me, stunned, her smile freezing into a rictus of confusion. "Do not," I said. My voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Do not touch me, Tiffany. I am here for our mother. I am not here for you." Tiffany blinked, her face flushing a deep, ugly red. I was just trying to be welcoming. You do not have to be such a bitch. Shirley, Mom is dying." "I know," I said. "That is why I am here. Move." I walked past her. Gavin had turned around at the commotion. He lowered his phone, ending the call without saying goodbye. He stared at me. His mouth actually opened slightly. He was expecting the Shirley he had discarded, the frazzled, dusty architect in ill-fitting jeans and a messy bun. He was expecting the woman who looked at the floor when she spoke. Instead, he was looking at a woman who ran her own firm, who owned a historic landmark in Boston, and who was carrying the child of a market maker. I stood straighter than I ever had in his presence. My skin was clear, my eyes were bright, and I radiated the kind of quiet, terrifying confidence that comes from having nothing left to lose. "Shirley," Gavin said, stepping forward. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face, the reflex of a man who sees something valuable and immediately wants to possess it. "Wow, you look incredible." He walked right up to me, ignoring the fact that my father was weeping in the chair and his wife was standing 2 feet away looking humiliated. He reached out, as if to take my hand. "It has been a long time," Gavin said, his voice dropping to that intimate register he used to use on me. "I always knew you cleaned up well. But this is something else. Italy suits you." I looked at his hand. I didn't take it. I looked up at his face, seeing the broken capillaries in his nose and the desperation in his eyes. "Boston," I corrected him coldly. "And do not touch me, Gavin." Gavin pulled his hand back, laughing nervously. "Right. Boston, feisty. I like it. You know, we should catch up while you are here. Grab a drink, for old time's sake." It was disgusting. His wife was right there. His mother-in-law was dying in the next room, and he was hitting on me. Then, Gavin's eyes drifted past me. He finally noticed Lucas. Lucas was standing in the shadows of the hallway, perfectly still. He was wearing a dark sweater and slacks under his coat. Simple, functional, no tie, no watch. To a man like Gavin, who measured worth by the size of a logo, Lucas looked like a nobody. Gavin squinted at him. "And who is this?" Gavin asked, gesturing vaguely at my husband. "Your driver? Or did you bring an assistant to take notes?" Tiffany snorted, crossing her arms over her chest. Probably an emotional support animal. Surely always needed a crutch. I felt a flash of rage, hot and sharp, but before I could speak, Lucas stepped forward. He moved into the light. He didn't look angry. He looked amused. It was the look a lion gives a limping gazelle. "I am her husband," Lucas said. His voice was deep, filling the hallway without being loud. Gavin's eyebrows shot up. "Husband? You got married?" He looked back at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, that was fast. I see you found someone suitable, safe." He emphasized the word safe with a sneer, implying boring, poor, and unremarkable. He looked Lucas up and down, dismissing him as a mid-level manager or a civil servant. "He looks like a solid guy." "Surely," Gavin said patronizingly. "Good for you, stable. That is what you always wanted, right? Someone who would not overshadow you." I opened my mouth to eviscerate him. I wanted to scream. He could buy your entire bloodline with the change in his pocket. But Lucas caught my eye. He gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. "Not yet." His eyes said, "Let him dig." "Yes," I said, a razor-thin smile cutting across my face. "He is very suitable. Now, if you will excuse us, I am going to see my mother." I walked into the ICU room, leaving them in the hallway. The room was dim, lit only by the blinking monitors. My mother lay in the bed, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. The stroke had ravaged her. Her face was slack, her mouth slightly open. The powerful, judgmental woman who had ruled our family with an iron fist was gone, replaced by a shell. I stood by the bed for 10 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a swell of forgiveness. I just felt a profound sense of finality. "I am here," I whispered to the unconscious form. "I made it. I survived you." Lucas stood by the door, guarding the space, ensuring the vultures outside didn't come in. My mother died 4 hours later. There were no final words, no dramatic awakening. The heart monitor simply changed its rhythm, slowed, and then flattened into a singular, high-pitched tone. The moment the doctor pronounced the time of death, the atmosphere in the waiting room shifted. The pretense of grief evaporated, replaced instantly by the panic of logistics. "We need to call the funeral home," Tiffany said, her voice rising. "We need to get the obituary in the Tribune. It has to be the Sunday edition. That is when everyone reads it." "I will handle the arrangements," Gavin said, pulling out his phone again. "But we need to keep it tasteful, not too expensive. We are a bit illiquid right now until the merger goes through." "Not expensive?" Tiffany shrieked. "She is Mom. We cannot bury her in a pine box. Gavin, what will people say? The Penningtons are a pillar of the community." "I am telling you, Tiff, the cash flow is tight," Gavin snapped, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Stop thinking about the optics for 1 second and think about the bank account." "I am not paying for a cheap funeral," Tiffany yelled. Then she spun toward me. "Shirley, you pay for it. You have no kids, no mortgage on a real house. You have been hoarding your money for years. You pay for Mom's funeral." I looked at them. They were fighting over the corpse before it was even cold. "I will pay for the funeral," I said quietly. "But I will pay the vendors directly. You do not touch a cent." Tiffany scoffed, but she looked relieved. "Fine, whatever. Just make sure it looks expensive." The doctor asked us to leave the room so the nurses could prepare the body. I felt a sudden, overwhelming need for air. The smell of the hospital was choking me. "I am going to the restroom," I told Lucas. "I will be right back." "I will wait here with your father," Lucas said. He sat down next to my dad, who was staring blankly at the wall, and handed him a bottle of water. I walked down the hallway, turning the corner toward the elevators where the restrooms were located. The corridor was empty, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light of the night shift. As I approached the alcove near the vending machines, I heard a voice. It was Gavin. He was pacing back and forth, hidden in the shadows of the waiting area alcove, his phone pressed to his ear. He was screaming. "I do not care what the contract says," Gavin hissed, his voice trembling with terrified rage. "I need more time. The merger is stalling. I just need another 30 days. I stopped. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. "The loan is due when?" Gavin shouted, panicking, causing his voice to crack. "Tomorrow? That is impossible. You cannot call the note tomorrow. I do not have the liquidity." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Please," Gavin begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic whimper. "Please, listen to me. I will lose everything. My house, the company, the cars. You cannot do this. Who is making this decision? Let me talk to the manager. Let me talk to the owner." Another pause. "Thorn Capital?" Gavin repeated. "I know the debt was sold to Thorn Capital. I do not care who they are. Tell them if they call this debt. I am dead. Do you hear me? Dead." I froze, the breath trapped in my lungs. Thorn Capital. The name echoed in my head, bouncing off the tile walls. Lucas's company was Orion Holdings, but Orion was a massive conglomerate. I knew he had subsidiaries. I knew he had a distressed asset division, but I had never paid attention to the specific names of the shell companies he used to acquire debt. Thorn, Lucas Thorn. My husband owned Gavin's debt. My husband held the mortgage on Gavin's life. I stood there in the hallway, the realization washing over me like a bucket of ice water. Lucas hadn't just come to Chicago to support me. He hadn't just come to hold my hand. He had been holding the axe the entire time. I thought about his smile in the living room when I said happiness was the best revenge. I thought about his reply. "Sometimes justice is a nice side dish." Gavin was still pleading on the phone, bargaining with a ghost, unaware that the man he was begging for mercy was sitting 30 feet away, calmly drinking a bottle of water next to my father. I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned and walked silently back toward the waiting room. I saw Lucas sitting there. He looked up as I approached. His face was impassive, granite steady, the anchor in the storm. But for the first time, I saw the shark beneath the surface. He looked at me, and he saw the knowledge in my eyes. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look sorry. He just winked. The door to our hotel suite at the Four Seasons clicked shut, sealing out the hum of the city, but the silence inside was heavy, charged with the static electricity of the secret I had just uncovered. Lucas walked over to the minibar, his movements calm and deliberate, as if we had just returned from a mundane dinner rather than a hospital deathbed. He loosened his tie, unbuttoning the top button of his shirt, and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. I stood by the entryway, my coat still on, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I watched him. I looked at the man I had slept beside for 3 years, the man who had held my hand through morning sickness and nightmares, and for the first time, I saw the vast, terrifying machinery that operated beneath his quiet surface. "Do you own Gavin's debt?" I asked. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a diamond cutter on glass. Lucas paused, the bottle of water hovering over the second glass. He didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He finished pouring the water, set the bottle down, and turned to face me. His expression was open, devoid of the guilt or defensiveness I had expected. "Yes," he said simply. I felt the air leave my lungs. "How long?" 2 years, Lucas replied, walking over to hand me a glass. I didn't take it. He set it on the console table beside me. "Thorn Capital's distressed asset division buys debt packages in bulk from banks that want to offload high-risk loans. We buy them for pennies on the dollar. Usually, I do not look at the individual names in the portfolio. It is just data, numbers on a spreadsheet." He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. But when this particular portfolio crossed my desk, one name flagged in the system. Sterling Estates. I remembered the name. I remembered what he did to you. "So you bought it on purpose?" I asked, stepping closer. "To destroy him?" "I bought it because it was a sound financial acquisition," Lucas corrected me, his voice steady. Gavin over-leveraged himself. He borrowed $40 million to build a resort in Florida. The Blue Flamingo. It was a tacky, overpriced disaster that was doomed from the start because he ignored the environmental impact reports, something you would never have done. The construction was delayed, the costs ballooned, and the bank panicked. They wanted out. I bought the note. He looked at me, his dark eyes intense. I knew who he was. Shirley. I held the debt. I could have called it on the day I bought it. I could have crushed him 2 years ago when you were still waking up screaming from nightmares about the wedding. But I didn't. Why? I whispered. Lucas took a sip of water, his gaze drifting to the window where the Chicago skyline glowed in the distance. He dug his own grave. Shirley. He took out more loans to pay the interest on the first ones. He embezzled from his own operating costs to fund Tiffany's lifestyle. He is currently trying to close a desperation merger with a conglomerate in Dubai. If that merger closes by tomorrow, he pays me off, and he survives. If it fails, Thorn Capital seizes everything: the company, the house, the cars, the shirt off his back. And the merger? I asked, knowing the answer before he gave it. The Dubai group walked away at 5 o'clock this evening, Lucas said softly. They saw his books. They saw the rot. Gavin just does not know it yet because he has been at the hospital. I sank onto the sofa, the weight of the revelation settling onto my shoulders. My husband wasn't just a businessman. He was the Grim Reaper in a bespoke suit. He had watched Gavin and Tiffany parade around on social media for 2 years, knowing he held the pin to their grenade, waiting for the perfect moment to pull it. You should have told me, I said. I know, Lucas admitted, coming to sit beside me. He took my cold hands in his. But I wanted you to build your own strength first. I wanted you to know that your success was yours, not something I bought for you by destroying your enemy. You rose on your own. Surely. Now, gravity is just taking its course with them. The next morning, the reality of the funeral preparations descended upon us like a thick fog. We met Tiffany and Gavin at the funeral home to finalize the arrangements. The meeting room was draped in heavy velvet and smelled of lilies, a scent that made my stomach turn, reminding me of the wedding flowers Gavin had tried to force on me. Tiffany was in rare form. The grief she performed for the funeral director was operatic. She sat in the high-backed chair, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, demanding the absolute best for Mommy. We need the solid mahogany casket with the silk lining, Tiffany declared, pointing to the most expensive option in the catalog. And the platinum handles. Mom loved luxury. She deserves to go out like a queen. That is a lovely choice, the funeral director said, his voice hushed and professional. That model is $12,000. Gavin winced, a visible tick in his jaw. Tiffany, honey, maybe the oak is more traditional? The mahogany feels a bit ostentatious. Ostentatious? Tiffany snapped, dropping the grieving daughter's act instantly. She is your mother-in-law. Gavin, you want to put her in a crate? What will the neighbors think? What will the country club members say if we cheap out? She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. Shirley, you are paying, right? You said you would, so we got the mahogany. I looked at the casket. It was gaudy. It was exactly what my mother would have wanted. Fine, I said, my voice flat. Get the mahogany, and the quartet, and the imported orchids. Tiffany smirked, a small victory lap. Good. And I need a check for $5,000 for the reception catering. I found a private chef who makes these amazing truffle sliders. No, I said. Tiffany froze. Excuse me? I said I would pay the vendors, I replied, opening my checkbook. I am writing a check to the funeral home right now, if you want a chef. Give me his invoice, and I will verify it and pay him directly. I am not giving you cash. Tiffany. You do not trust me? Tiffany gasped, clutching her pearls. I am your sister. I trust you to be exactly who you are, I said, tearing the check out of the book and handing it to the director. I am not financing your lifestyle under the guise of burying our mother. Tiffany let out a noise of frustrated rage, but she couldn't argue without admitting she needed the cash. She stormed out of the room to call her stylist, leaving me alone with Gavin and the funeral director. Lucas had stepped out to take a call, presumably to ensure the Dubai deal stayed dead. The director excused himself to process the payment. I stood up to leave, buttoning my coat. Gavin moved quickly, blocking the doorway. "Shirley, wait," he said. I stopped, revulsion coiling in my gut. "Move, Gavin." "Look, I just wanted to say, I appreciate this," he said, gesturing to the paperwork. "Paying for the funeral. Things are a little liquidly challenged right now. Just temporary. Of course. Big deal closing next week." "I am sure," I said dryly. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of stale sweat and too much breath mints, trying to mask the scent of stress. "Seeing you again, it brought up a lot of memories," Gavin said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "You know, Tiffany she is a lot. She spends money faster than I can make it. She does not understand the business. She does not understand me." He reached out, his hand hovering near my arm. "I miss our talks. Shirley," he said. "I miss your competence. We were a good team, weren't we? You built the foundation. I sold the dream. Maybe once this grief passes, we could grab a coffee? I could use a consultant on my new project, someone I can actually trust." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had once thought was my soulmate. I saw him for what he was, a parasite looking for a new host. He realized Tiffany was sinking the ship, and he was trying to line up a lifeboat. "Gavin," I said, my voice icy, "I would not drink coffee with you if you were the last man on earth and I was dying of thirst. You chose your chaotic, expensive, shiny life. Now go live in it." I pushed past him. "You are still bitter," he called after me, his voice turning nasty. "It has been 3 years. Shirley, get over it." I walked out into the hallway and nearly collided with Tiffany, who had just finished her phone call. She saw me coming from the room where Gavin was, and her eyes narrowed into slits. "Stay away from him," she hissed, stepping in front of me. "I saw you there, whispering, 'Do not think you can swoop in just because you bought a nice coat and got a makeover.'" "I have zero interest in your husband, Tiffany," I said, exhausted. "He cornered me." "Please," she scoffed. "You are obsessed with us. That is why you are paying for the funeral. You want to buy your way back into the family. And who is that guy you brought, that Lucas character?" She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "He barely speaks. Does he even have a job? Or is he just your sugar daddy? Did you find some mid-level manager having a midlife crisis to pay for your Italian wool?" I stared at her. The irony was so rich I could taste it. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, mocking the wife of the man who owned the ground beneath her feet. "Lucas is retired," I lied smoothly. It wasn't technically a lie. He had retired from caring about people's opinions years ago. "Figures," Tiffany sneered. "Well, keep him away from the VIP guests tomorrow. We have important people coming, investors. I do not want your embarrassing nobody husband ruining Gavin's networking opportunities." "I will make sure he stays out of the way," I said, "until he is ready to be seen." The morning of the funeral dawned gray and weeping. The sky was a bruise of purple and slate clouds, threatening a storm that wouldn't break. I stood in front of the mirror in the hotel suite, fastening the pearl earrings Lucas had given me for our first anniversary. My black dress was simple, severe, and elegant. I smoothed my hand over my stomach, whispering a silent promise to the life growing inside me. "You will never know people like this." Lucas came out of the dressing room. I stopped breathing for a second. He was wearing a suit I had never seen before. It was black, cut from a fabric that seemed to absorb the light. The tailoring was razor sharp. He wore a crisp white shirt and a black tie. He looked devastating. He looked powerful. He looked like the executioner arriving for the final sentencing. He adjusted his cufflinks, platinum, etched with the Orion constellation. "You look," I started, but couldn't find the word. "Ready," Lucas finished for me. He walked over to me, placing his hands on my shoulders. He looked into my eyes, and I saw the fierce, protective fire burning behind his granite gaze. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "I just want to get through the eulogy and leave." "We will leave," Lucas promised, "but not before we balance the ledger." He checked his watch. The Dubai merger officially failed at 4 o'clock this morning, Gulf Standard Time. The foreclosure paperwork was filed electronically at 8 o'clock Chicago time. The process servers are already en route to the church. My eyes widened. To the church? Lucas, is that not cruel? Gavin tried to leverage your mother's death to get an extension, Lucas said, his voice hard. He used grief as a bargaining chip. I am simply meeting him on his chosen battlefield. He offered me his arm. Today, Shirley, you mourn your mother, he said. You say your goodbye. You play the dutiful daughter one last time. I will handle the rest. He opened the door, the hallway light casting a long shadow across the floor. By sunset, Lucas said, a dark smile touching his lips. They will know exactly who I am, and more importantly, they will know exactly who you are. We walked out of the room, the door clicking shut behind us with the finality of a gavel striking the sound block. The trial was over. The sentencing was about to begin. The air inside St. Jude's Episcopal Church was so thick with tension, it felt less like a place of worship and more like a courtroom minutes before a verdict. The pews were packed, a sea of black wool and cashmere filling the nave, but I knew very few of these people were here to mourn the woman in the mahogany casket. My mother had cultivated a circle of friends who treated funerals as networking events, and Gavin had clearly invited every business associate in his contact list. I could see them huddled in clusters near the back, men in expensive suits checking their watches, their eyes darting around the room not to find comfort, but to gauge the financial health of the Sterling family. They were sharks circling a boat that was taking on water, waiting to see if it would capsize. I sat in the front row next to Lucas. My father sat on my other side, a crumpled heap of a man who looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. Gavin and Tiffany sat across the aisle. Tiffany was performing the role of the grieving daughter with the dedication of a method actress gunning for an Oscar. She was draped in black lace, clutching a handkerchief that remained suspiciously dry despite the loud, shuddering gasps she emitted every few minutes. Gavin sat stiffly beside her, his leg bouncing with a nervous energy that vibrated the entire pew. He wasn't looking at the altar. He was looking at the back of the room, scanning the crowd for a man named Arthur Henderson, the lead investor for the merger that was supposed to save his life. When the priest signaled for the eulogies, I stood up first. I walked to the pulpit. The wood felt cool under my hands. I looked out at the sea of faces, the bridge club members who had judged my clothes, the neighbors who had whispered about my failure to launch, the business rivals who were betting on Gavin's collapse. I took a breath. I did not cry. My mother was a woman of precise standards, I began, my voice clear and steady, echoing slightly in the vaulted ceiling. She believed that appearances were the architecture of a life. She taught us that the world treats you how you present yourself. It was a hard lesson, often a cold one, but it was the lesson she lived by. She loved her garden because she could control it. She could prune the unruly branches and force the blooms into perfect symmetry. I hope that now, wherever she is, she has found a peace that does not require pruning. I hope she has found a place where she can just be, without the need for perfection. It was honest, it was dignified, and it was final. I stepped down. Then it was Tiffany's turn. She threw herself onto the pulpit, gripping the sides as if she were about to collapse. Mommy, she wailed, her voice cracking theatrically. My beautiful, perfect mommy, you were my best friend. You were my soulmate. I do not know how I will breathe without you. You were the light of this family, the glue that held us together. She went on for 10 minutes, listing expensive vacations they had taken, mentioning designer brands they both loved, and painting a portrait of a saint that no one in the room recognized. It was a performance designed to center herself as the primary victim of this tragedy. She ended by dramatically kissing her fingers and pressing them to the casket, sobbing loudly as Gavin helped her back to her seat. The service concluded with a hymn that no one really sang. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church were thrown open, revealing the gray, weeping sky of Chicago. We began the recessional. My father walked first, supported by a deacon, then Gavin and Tiffany, then me and Lucas. As we moved down the center aisle, the whispers started. I could hear them buzzing like flies. Is that the sister? The one who ran away? Who is that man with her? I do not recognize him. Gavin looks terrible. Have you heard the rumors about the Florida project? We stepped out of the sanctuary and onto the wide stone steps of the church. The rain had paused, but the air was heavy with humidity, a suffocating blanket that made the wool of our coats itch. The hearse was waiting at the curb, its rear door open to receive the casket, but the procession stalled on the steps. A group of men was standing near the bottom of the stairs. They weren't mourners, they were predators. It was the group of investors Gavin had been desperate to see. At the front of the group stood Arthur Henderson. He was a silver-haired titan of Chicago industry, a man whose approval could launch a company and whose disdain could bury it. Gavin saw him and practically tripped down the stairs, dragging Tiffany with him. He was desperate to close the gap, desperate to project the image of the solvent, grieving heir. "Arthur!" Gavin called out, his voice too loud, too eager for a funeral. "I am so touched you came. It means the world to Tiffany and me. I know this is a somber occasion, but perhaps we could speak briefly at the reception? I have the final papers for the merger ready for signature." Tiffany straightened her spine, blinking away her fake tears instantly. She pasted on a dazzling, brave smile, clinging to Gavin's arm like a trophy. She was ready to charm the checkbook right out of Mr. Henderson's pocket. "Mr. Henderson," Tiffany purred, extending a hand. "It is so good to see you. Gavin speaks of you so often." Arthur Henderson did not take her hand. He did not even look at Gavin. His eyes were fixed on a point over their shoulders. He looked past the desperate couple, past the mahogany casket being loaded into the hearse, and locked eyes with the man standing quietly beside me. Mr. Henderson's face, usually a mask of corporate indifference, broke into a look of genuine shock and deference. He stepped around Gavin as if he were a traffic cone. He walked up the steps, ignoring the bewildered murmurs of the crowd, and stopped 2 feet in front of Lucas. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I had no idea you were in Chicago. I thought you were based in Boston now." The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Mr. Thorne." I felt Lucas shift beside me. He didn't puff up. He didn't posture. He simply nodded, a small, polite inclination of his head. "I am, Arthur," Lucas replied, his voice calm, deep, and sounding like gravel rolling over velvet. "My wife's mother passed away. We are here to pay our respects." Henderson looked at me, then back at Lucas. His eyes widened. "My condolences. I didn't realize—" "Wait, are we still on for the acquisition meeting next Tuesday? My board is very eager to hear your proposal on the logistics buyout." The silence that followed was absolute. The wind seemed to stop. The traffic noise from the street faded into a dull hum. The freeze happened in slow motion. Gavin, who had been turning to follow Henderson, stopped dead. His face, which had been flushed with exertion, drained of color until it was the shade of old ash. "Thorne?" Gavin whispered. The word clawed its way out of his throat. "Lucas. Thorne?" Tiffany frowned, looking from Henderson to Gavin, and then to Lucas. She didn't understand the business world, but she understood hierarchy. She saw the way the most powerful man in Chicago was bowing to her sister's nobody husband. And then, a memory clicked into place behind her eyes. I saw it happen. I saw her recall the nights Gavin had paced the floor, screaming about creditors. I saw her remember the terrifying letters stamped with a specific logo that she had found in his briefcase, letters she wasn't supposed to see. "Thorne Capital." She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She dropped her clutch. It hit the concrete steps with a sharp clatter that sounded like a gunshot. "No," Tiffany breathed. No, that is not. Gavin turned slowly to face us. He looked at Lucas. He looked at the simple black suit, the lack of a watch, the quiet stillness, and he realized that he had miscalculated everything. He realized that the predator he had been running from for 2 years had been sleeping in the same hotel as him. You, Gavin stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Lucas. You are the chairman of Thorn Capital? The crowd on the steps went deadly silent. They sensed the shift. The funeral was over. The execution had begun. Lucas looked at Gavin. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had already read the end of the book and was just waiting for the other characters to catch up. I am, Lucas said. Gavin's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the handrail for support. But I sent the extension request. My lawyer sent it yesterday. We just need 30 days. The merger. Henderson is right here. We can close it. Lucas turned his gaze to Henderson. Arthur, did you not tell him? Henderson looked uncomfortable. He adjusted his tie. We pulled out. Gavin, I sent the memo at 5 o'clock this morning. After looking at your debt-to-equity ratio, well, it is a liability we cannot take on, especially since the primary debt holder is Thorn Capital. We do not bet against the house. Gavin made a sound like a wounded animal. He looked at Henderson, then back at Lucas. His eyes were wide, rimmed with white, filled with a primal terror. You own the debt, Gavin whispered. You own all of it. Tiffany stared at Lucas. Her eyes were huge. She looked at the man she had called a mid-level manager, the man she had mocked for wearing a simple coat. She realized in that second that he could buy and sell everyone on these steps without checking his bank balance. She looked at me. She saw the way I was standing, tall, armored in Italian wool, my hand resting comfortably in the crook of Lucas's arm. She saw the diamond stud earrings. She saw the platinum band on my finger. Shirley? Tiffany whimpered. Lucas took a step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Lucas said, his voice cutting through the humid air like a scythe, your extension request was denied. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. Gavin flinched, as if he expected a weapon. In a way, it was... Lucas pulled out a white envelope. He held it out. We have initiated foreclosure proceedings on Sterling Estates, Lucas stated, the words falling like stones, and on your personal assets, which were used as collateral, the house in Lake Forest, the condo in Aspen, the cars. He paused, letting the weight of the list crush the air out of Gavin's lungs. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Lucas finished. Gavin didn't take the envelope. He couldn't. His hands were clawing at his chest. His breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. He looked at the hearse where my mother lay. Then at the investors, who were now looking at him with open disgust. And finally, at me. You, Gavin choked out. You knew. Yes, I said softly. The color left his face completely. His eyes rolled back. His knees gave way. Gavin collapsed onto the concrete steps of the church, clutching his chest in a full-blown panic attack. The crowd gasped. People rushed forward. Call 911, someone shouted. Tiffany didn't rush to her husband. She stood frozen, staring at the envelope in Lucas's hand. Then she looked at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound that tore through the decorum of the funeral. You planned this, Tiffany shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my face. You bitch! You came back here to ruin us! You planned this whole thing! I looked down at her. I looked at the sister who had stolen my clothes, my confidence, and my fiancé. I looked at the woman who had smirked while I paid for the funeral she demanded. I didn't shout back. I didn't defend myself. I just leaned into the solid warmth of my husband, the steel column who held up my sky. I didn't plan it. Tiffany, I said, my voice calm enough to freeze the rain. I just watched it happen. Lucas dropped the envelope onto Gavin's heaving chest. Let us go, Shirley, he said. We turned and walked down the steps, past the chaos, past the ruin, and toward the waiting car. Behind us, the wail of a siren began to rise in the distance. But I didn't look back. The funeral reception was held in the private banquet hall of the local country club, a venue that Gavin had insisted upon just 3 days ago to impress his investors. It was a space designed for celebration, with crystal chandeliers reflecting light off polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured golf course. But that afternoon, the room felt less like a celebration of life and more like the waiting room for an execution. The atmosphere was suffocating. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone, fighting against the humidity of the storm that had just passed. The guests, a collection of Chicago's social elite and nervous creditors, stood in tight, hushed clusters. They held glasses of expensive champagne that I had paid for. But nobody was drinking. They were whispering. The rumors were flying faster than the waiters could circulate the hors d'oeuvres. Gavin was not there. The ambulance had taken him from the church steps directly to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The initial diagnosis, according to the whispers rippling through the room, was a severe panic attack mimicking a cardiac event. His body, exhausted by 2 years of deceit and terror, had finally shut down. That left Tiffany to host the disaster alone. I stood near the back of the room by the open balcony doors, letting the cool breeze touch my face. Lucas stood beside me, a silent, solid presence. He held a glass of sparkling water, looking out at the gray sky with the calm detachment of a man who had done his job. We were not mingling. We were simply waiting for the appropriate amount of time to pass before we could leave without causing a second scene. Across the room, I watched my sister. Tiffany was trying to salvage the wreckage. She moved from group to group, her smile brittle and terrifyingly fixed. She was still clinging to the role of the grieving, wealthy heiress, but the audience had stopped believing the performance. I saw women turn their backs when she approached. I saw men check their phones and suddenly remember urgent appointments they had to keep, the social immunity she had enjoyed, as Mrs. Sterling had evaporated the moment Lucas handed Gavin that envelope. She was alone, and she knew it. Eventually, she saw me. Her eyes locked onto mine across the expanse of the room. The fake smile dropped. A look of raw, naked desperation took its place. She said something to the person she was talking to, a woman who looked relieved to be released, and began to walk toward me. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble, a staccato rhythm of approaching conflict. Lucas shifted slightly, angling his body to shield me, but I placed a hand on his arm. "It is okay," I said softly. "I can handle this." Tiffany stopped 3 feet away from us. She looked like a wreck, up close. The cracks in her foundation were impossible to miss. Her makeup was smudged where she had angrily wiped away tears in the limousine. Her hands were trembling. "Are you happy?" she asked. Her voice was a hiss, low and venomous. "Gavin is in the hospital. He might be having a heart attack. Does that make you feel good? Shirley, did you get the revenge you wanted?" I looked at her, and I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hate. It was a pity. It was the kind of pity you feel for a child who breaks a toy because they do not understand how it works. "I did not put Gavin in the hospital, Tiffany," I said calmly. "The truth did." "The truth?" Tiffany laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound that drew the attention of the nearby guests. "You blindsided us. You showed up here with your billionaire husband and ambushed us at our mother's funeral. How could you do this to your family? We are blood, Shirley." "Family?" I repeated the word, tasting the ash of it. "You stopped being family the day you slept with my fiancé in my parents' living room. You stopped being family when you let me pay for this reception while you mocked me behind my back." "I was just trying to survive," Tiffany argued, her voice rising. "Gavin promised to take care of us. He said he had it handled. I did not know about the loans. I did not know about the debt." "You knew enough," I countered. "You knew the lifestyle was a lie. You knew he was drowning, and instead of helping him bail out the water, you demanded a bigger boat. You wanted the mahogany casket. You wanted the truffle sliders. You bled him dry. Tiffany, She flinched as if I had slapped her. I deserve nice things. I am not like you. I cannot live in a basement and draw pictures all day. I was meant for this life. What life? I asked, gesturing around the room where people were now openly staring at us. Look around you. It is gone. The house is foreclosed. The cars are being repossessed. The accounts are frozen. Tiffany's face crumbled. The reality was finally piercing the delusion. But Gavin will fix it. He always fixes it. Gavin is finished. Lucas spoke up. His voice was deep and final. The audit of Sterling Estates has already begun. It is not just bankruptcy. Tiffany, it is embezzlement. He was moving money from construction loans into personal accounts to pay for your credit cards. That is a federal crime. He is not going back to the penthouse. He is going to prison. Tiffany stared at Lucas with wide, horrified eyes. She looked at the man she had dismissed as a nobody, realizing too late that he was the judge, jury, and executioner. You destroyed him, she whispered. I didn't destroy Gavin, Lucas corrected her gently. His greed did. I just stopped enabling it. I stopped the clock. Tiffany looked back at me. Tears began to stream down her face, and this time, they were real. They were tears of terror. Shirley, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Help me, please. I have nowhere to go. If they take the house, I will be on the street. I have no money. I have no job. You have millions now. You can help me. Just a little loan. Just until I get back on my feet. I looked at my sister. I remembered the little girl who used to steal my dolls. I remembered the teenager who stole my clothes. I remembered the woman who stole my life. She had taken and taken and taken. A black hole of need that could never be filled. If I gave her money now, it wouldn't help her. It would just be one more thing for her to consume. No, I said. Tiffany gasped. What? But I am your sister. You stole my fiancé because you wanted his money, I said, my voice steady and loud enough for the eavesdroppers to hear. You wanted the spotlight. You wanted the glory. Well, now the money is gone. But you still have the spotlight. Tiffany, enjoy it. You are the wife of a bankrupt fraud. I took a step closer to her. You have to learn to survive on your own now, I said. Just like I did. You are young. You are healthy. You can work. It will be hard. And it will be ugly. And you will not be wearing Chanel while you do it. But it is the only way you will ever be real. Tiffany stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The rejection was absolute. Come on, Lucas, I said, turning away from her. We are done here. We walked out of the banquet hall, leaving Tiffany standing alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the ruins of her vanity. The fallout was swift and brutal. In the weeks that followed, the collapse of the Sterling Empire was the only thing the Chicago papers wrote about. It was a spectacular implosion. The forensic accountants uncovered a Ponzi scheme of staggering incompetence. Gavin had been robbing Peter to pay Paul for 5 years. He had falsified environmental reports, bribed zoning officials, and stolen millions from investors. He was arrested 3 days after being discharged from the hospital. The photo of him being led out of the precinct in handcuffs, looking pale and defeated, was plastered on the front page of the Tribune. He was facing 20 years in federal prison. Tiffany was left with nothing. The foreclosure on the Lake Forest house was executed immediately. The marshals seized everything of value, the jewelry, the furs, the designer furniture, to pay back the creditors. I heard through an old acquaintance that she had moved into a small rental apartment near the airport, a place with thin walls and the constant roar of jet engines overhead. She was working at a retail counter in a department store at the mall, selling perfume to women who lived the life she used to pretend was hers. It was a cruel irony, a mirror image of the life she had mocked me for living. But I took no joy in it. It was simply the math of the universe balancing itself out. Before we left Chicago, there was one last thing I had to do. On our final morning, Lucas drove me to the cemetery. The sky was clear, a crisp, cold blue that promised winter was coming. The grass was wet with dew. We walked to the fresh grave. The mahogany casket was buried now, 6 feet under the damp earth. The flowers from the funeral were already wilting, the expensive orchids turning brown in the cold air. I stood there for a long time, looking at the headstone. It was large, ostentatious, and carved with the words, "Beloved Mother and Wife." I thought about the woman buried there. I thought about the way she had looked at me when I was a child, like I was a smudge on a pristine window. I thought about the way she had sided with Gavin because he had money. I thought about the years I had spent trying to earn her love with grades, with awards, with obedience. I realized now that her love was a currency I could never have afforded, because the price was my soul. "Goodbye, Mom," I said softly. I didn't say I loved her. I didn't say I forgave her. Those would have been lies, and I was done with lies. "I hope you found peace," I said. "But I am not looking for your approval anymore. I have my own." I felt a weight lift off my chest, a physical sensation of release. The invisible cord that had tethered me to her expectations for 32 years finally snapped. I turned to Lucas. He was standing a few feet away, giving me space, his hands in his pockets, watching the horizon. "I am ready," I said. He held out his hand. I took it. We walked away from the grave, leaving the dead to bury the dead. We flew back to Boston that afternoon. The private jet climbed steeply, punching through the layer of gray clouds that hung over the Midwest and emerging into the blinding, golden sunlight of the upper atmosphere. The cabin was quiet and warm. I reclined my seat, resting my head on Lucas's shoulder. He shifted so I could be comfortable, his arm wrapping around me, pulling me close. I placed my hand on my stomach. The baby kicked, a small, fluttery movement that felt like a secret promise. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "The future," I said. "What about it?" "I was thinking about the nursery," I said, smiling. "I do not want it to be pink or blue. I want it to be green, like a garden. I want it to feel alive." "Green is good," Lucas agreed. "We can paint it this weekend." "And I was thinking about what we will teach them," I continued. "I do not want to teach them about legacy, Lucas, or about status. I do not care if they are an architect or a mechanic or a teacher." "What do you want to teach them?" he asked, kissing the top of my head. "I want to teach them the difference between gold and steel," I said. "I want to teach them that their worth is not in what they own, but in what they build. And I want to teach them that they are loved, not for what they do, but for who they are." Lucas squeezed my hand. "That sounds like a good plan. Shirley, the best plan." I looked out the window at the clouds below. They looked like an ocean of white foam, endless and serene. Somewhere down there, under that blanket of white, was the city of Chicago. Somewhere down there was a woman selling perfume and a man sitting in a jail cell. Somewhere down there was the ghost of the girl I used to be. But I wasn't down there anymore. I had spent half my life trying to be seen by people who were blind to my worth. I had screamed into the void, begging for a scrap of validation. Now, sitting beside the man who saw me when I was invisible, the man who had burned down the world just to keep me safe, I realized the truth. The greatest revenge wasn't seeing them fall. It was realizing I no longer cared if they watched me fly. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Family Revenge Stories, like the video, and smash that hype button to help this story get heard by more people.